Welcome everybody out to the Marketing to Win podcast. I've got Kimberly with me today, and I'm really excited on. She had some awesome ideas that we were going to talk about today around uh, finding efficiency and effectiveness in a marketing team and tech. So let's just start with quick intros, like we always do. Tell us a little about you, who you work for, what you do, and what you sell, and then we'll kind of maybe tee off like how you want to get into this conversation of what your experience has been or whatever. So, and I'll have plenty of questions along the way.
Sounds good. So my name is Kim Brokling, and I currently work for Technology Response Team, which is a managed IT service. And it's a little bit of a unique story how I started there. I actually, before this, I worked at a travel company, and they were one of our vendors. And so I had actually hired this team to help at that company, and I loved them. I was a raving fan. And so when I got the opportunity to come work here, I was really, really excited because I'm really impressed with their service and what they do and how they can free up time for people who are trying to run their businesses and don't really have time to fix their Outlook, and also, to help put in the security pieces to make sure that your data is safe. I think that's really important. It's really tough for small companies to do that on their own because it changes so rapidly. So I was thrilled to come here. And then my current challenge there is I am their first marketing person. And so I am working to build up a marketing program at the company, which is incredibly exciting. And I really enjoy it. And I think that is a pretty good summary.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, total team wise, how big is a team?
7 people. We're
Yeah,
tiny.
okay. That is so that I let so at Cloud App we're a little bit bigger. We're around like 30 something. But that small team vibe, just like super scrappy and just getting stuff done is so fun. So I don't how big was your team at the previous job?
Well, it's interesting because I'm a very operationally oriented person. And so I
Sure.
was also hired there with about 5 people. And then, well, I left with COVID. It obviously shrunk pretty rapidly because
Sure.
international travel stopped being so hot this last year for some mysterious reason.
Yes.
But before that, I actually was able to help that company grow and put in the operations in place for their marketing and sales team. And they had grown up to, I think, 25 people.
Oh,
And
nice.
so, yeah, I really enjoy that challenge, or that you described it as scrappiness of organizing the chaos, basically.
Yeah, because there's just like so much to get done, and like with those small teams, you've got to look bigger than you really are, and like you said, it's a big challenge. Uh,
Definitely.
um, okay, so you're talking about how you're essentially building marketing from the ground up. So did they have anything there before like you started? Like what was already kind of in place and
Yeah, well, and this is one of the things that I think is really interesting because in this team, and I think a lot of teams, is they have services that help them with their marketing, but a lot of times those end up being pretty fragmented. So, we have a place that helps with some of the outbound campaigns. Um, there's a service that helps with our website, but there hasn't really been any testing done on the website. So there's a lot of room for improvement there. And I think most marketers would agree a website is basically your first impression in many, many cases. So that's critically important. And then another thing that I noticed with these teams is, when you start a business, you're really curious where your clients are coming from. And so, I find that we have a lot of that data, but it's like in somebody's head, or it's maybe in one software but not in another, or we know that they came in for this reason but we don't really have a good sense of what kind of tickets and where we're spending our time with those clients, because all of that data exists, but it's all in separate places.
Sure.
So, I think for me, my strategy with a smaller company is first, let's get all of this in one place so we can get a really clear picture of who our clients are and what their biggest pain points are, because that's going to be what drives the content strategy, right? Like, you don't want to be spending a lot of time putting out this amazing content that is really helpful for somebody who isn't going to shop for your product.
Sure.
That's not the best situation. And so with any new company, I think it's really important to dive into who those customers are. But for me, like, the first step is getting all your data sort of aligned so you can get that background information, and then you start actually talking to clients or sitting in on some of the sales calls and that type of thing.
Yeah. How do you find the discipline to do that, right? Because on small teams, you're expected to come in and start. Like, you got to get going. So, like, how are you? I think I agree with you that long term you have to do that. But I think the discipline to do that process, because especially if there's a lot of disjointed systems or you're not sure where everything is, um, as someone who's been in a lot of like operational projects and stuff, it can be a task to get those together, right? Especially if it can get complicated. So why do you feel like there's the value to doing that first? And like, how do you have the discipline to do that?
Well, I think there's a few points to that. The first is it's foundational. If you don't know who your customer is, you can put together the best marketing in the world, but it might not be the best marketing for your particular clients. Another thing is that what I find a lot in small organizations is that you are really strapped for time, and everybody's doing a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
And what can happen is three people are doing the same task, which is not helpful because nobody has time. And so, I think putting together the data, you start to be able to see that. And then it allows all of your employees, whether they're marketing or sales or service, to actually work a little bit more effectively because they're not digging around in three different softwares. They don't have to ask the owner, hey, what was the story with this client? I forget what was their big pain point or what was their thing about this particular system. But it is, to your other point, it is a little bit of a hard sell. And I think there's two things that are really important. The first one is that you need to be very clear on that value and very clear that you have a plan in place, very clear that you understand what the benefits are because you have to sell it. And that's not going to happen unless you know why you're doing it. And so I think that's a big part of it. Another thing that is harder and takes a little bit more time is you really need to build up trust with everybody on the team.
Yeah.
Uh, because especially with like CRM, nobody wants to be a data janitor, right? Where it's like, oh, I spend all my time entering things into the CRM so that we can run reports. That
Yep.
doesn't sound great. And honestly, it doesn't move the needle forward in a lot of cases. For me, it's helpful to say, okay, well, how is everybody actually using this now? What questions are you having? Where are we struggling? Because if you can figure out how to get more accurate data and also make it easier for your team, that's where you're really going to start getting support for what you're doing and getting the trust of your team. And then if you have harder asks later, people are more likely to support you or help you, because, again, that data is critical, but so is getting the work done. So
Yeah.
I think selling it, but also really understanding how your team members use the system. Another thing that's really helpful as you're doing that is to, as much as possible, make sure you're not breaking anything when you're making those changes. So, like,
That
not at
builds
this
trust
point.
real quick.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, at the travel company, I had I luckily did not break it, but there was something, and I was like, "Well, this can go. This isn't necessary." Everybody's usually happy when you take something away, and then I luckily talked to the right people and realized that was what prompted us to send the bill. So, so I was very lucky in that I had those relationships built with the whole team, so that I could get feedback. And I think a lot of trust also is just constantly asking people that you don't think would be impacted
Yeah,
how how it impacts them. And a lot of times they'll say it doesn't, and that's great. But
but at least you thought of them.
yeah, exactly. I mean, it does two things, because the first thing is they feel heard, and then the second thing is if you were right and they really did impact them, you're not making a mess that they have to clean up. Or if you are, sometimes you have to, you can at least warn them, like,
Yeah,
all right, this is going to change, it's going to be a little bit messy, this is the time frame I anticipate. And I think having that communication also is incredibly helpful, because especially if you choose to change software, there is usually quite a long period where
yep,
those things you can't think of everything. You can get it maybe 90%, but that 10% feels brutal. um,
yep.
and so I think setting proper expectations goes a long way to building trust as well.
Yeah, so maybe let's dive into a little bit of, if you can, like specifics of how you're doing that now where you're at, right? So you're in there, you've got seven other people or six other people that you're working with. You're trying to understand customer data, and then just you know, how the systems and data flow and work. How are you how are you approach, like, what are you actually doing? Like, what do you do to do it?
What do you do here?
Yeah.
So there's a few different places. I mean, first of all, there's the places that I can dig into that definitely don't impact everyone. Like I said, I'm very focused on our website right now. Like, I can
Hmm.
see Google Analytics and how well our forms are converting without really breaking anything, which is
Right.
nice. Um, the other thing I think that's really important is, with the team this small, you need to be talking to everyone,
Right.
and that's been really interesting, because working remotely, that's a little bit harder. I'm lucky because I was working with this team like as their client before, so I sort of know everybody from before, but it's still a new role, and everybody's feeling out how they interact or what information I'm interested in,
Yep.
and those types of things. So I would say the first thing I'm doing, though, is trying to reach out, trying to ask a lot of questions about who our clients are, trying to do it in a way that's very respectful of people's time. Sometimes if I don't need that data right now, I'll keep a running file to the side, so that I can quickly get just what's important to what I'm working on right at this second. Because if you inundate people with a million questions, it sounds more like an interrogation and less like building a relationship. So I definitely I have a list of all the things I'm trying to work on or will work on, or questions I have. Then I try to make a point of reaching out frequently, because I also feel like the more frequent you reach out, the more you can get to know the team and what's important to them. Another thing that I find really important, or that's been really helpful to me here and at other places, is to really take advantage of times when the team is together. So if you're doing a staff meeting, I like to go over what were your wins for this week, because that gives you a really quick look at what you can see, what people are working on, what our team is excited about.
Yeah.
A lot of times those are client victories. A lot of times they're excited because somebody else was excited about their work. And so I find asking that question in a staff meeting is super helpful because it builds morale. It's very positive. It gives you content. It's like it gives you everything, and it's such an easy question, and it takes
Yeah.
maybe 1 to 2 minutes per person at the staff meeting to go through it. And it also helps keep everybody on the same page about what's happening in the company,
Yep.
so I can tell them these were my victories. And so I really find these, what were your wins this week, a really powerful tool for that, particularly if it's in a group setting. And so that's something that I've started to do with the team. Definitely right now I'm looking at how all of the technology talks to each other because again, like not all of our data is linked. And so it's a question of, can we make it link? Do we need a new software? If we do a new software, will it integrate with this other software? How does that impact ticketing? How does it impact billing? All these different things. And so of course, you need to have some background in how to manage data, how to manage those systems. And so for me, like I start looking at the system and that guides what questions I can ask with the team. And then I think the other thing really that I'm prioritizing is getting to know our clients and who they are and how they came here. I was really interested. I think it speaks very highly of our team. A lot of our clients, the way that they started is they used to, kind of like me, they used to work at a company that had hired us, and then they go to the new company and they're like, this is terrible, let's call Chris. Chris is the owner of the company. So I think that's a really interesting data point for me to know is like people are really happy. They kind of take us with them wherever they go in the workforce. And so, yeah, I guess just learning about that as well is really helpful because it's impossible. I mean, there's a million ways to generate leads, right? But some of them are way more effective than others, and you can't be on every social platform and blog and do ads and it's not possible, especially at this small team. Like I am one person. I cannot write that much.
That brings up a really interesting point too about like maybe the complexity of data and understanding customers for big firms makes easy sense, right? Because in the sense that you've got a huge budget, you've got to figure out where to put. I guess the concept's the same, but the meaning is different. So at a big firm, you've got a massive budget. You need to understand where to put the money, but it's big. Your budget's big enough that, and your resources are big enough that you're not putting essentially all your budget into one or two channels. You're spreading it across, and then you're going to allocate it at different percentages. On small teams like yours and mine, though, where 100% you can't touch every channel. If you try, you're gonna kind of flounder. So you have to pick a couple lanes. So, but when you pick a couple of lanes, you've got to be like sure that those lanes are going to. I mean, you don't have the budget. Like most of your budget is time that you have to put into it, and you have to know where to go. And there's something to be said of just like I'm in the middle. I don't know where the balance. There's a balance somewhere, and I think it ebbs and flows. But one side is, going hard into the data and trying to understand and figure it out. There's another side of just like doing stuff to see what works quickly, failing fast, and then adjusting. There's probably a medium in there somewhere of like the sweet spot. But for small companies, go ahead.
The way that I view that is a lot of people come in and they say, okay, well, let's try this and see what happens. Yeah. And I don't think that's very effective. I think a better way to do it is here's my hypothesis. If we change these landing pages on the website, we're going to have conversions increase by this much. Let's try it. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, then you're on to the next thing. Now, the really challenging part I find for a small company is it takes a while to get the data. Yeah. It's not like Amazon or Google where there's a billion visitors a day, right?
Yeah.
That would crash our site, so I don't hope for that. But it takes a while to build the data. But I think having a hypothesis about the work that you're doing is really helpful because it gives you a framework too of like, okay, well, how long should I be looking at this? How many people need to visit before I decide this is enough? And I think people miss the mark there with wild experimentation. I think it makes more sense to say, okay, this is what we're doing, this is the length of time, and this is what we expect to see. If it's this, then that's winning and we can double down on it. If it's Y, then it's losing and we need to try something different. And I think that gives a lot of structure to that problem.
Yeah, I think I can appreciate that. I think to your point, like if you approach experimentation as in like a let's see what happens mentality, odds are probably that um, you're not intentional enough with measuring success to know whether it worked or not. So
Right.
you're acting fast, which I on small teams is a good thing. You have to do it, but um, you I like how you put it. You haven't put like a foundation or structure in place that kind of enables you to intentionally understand the impact of your results and then make decisions that can be more effective. And so you'll start something like, let's take your website for example. You're like, oh, you know what? I don't like the headline. Let's change the headline. And then you change the headline, and then before you know it, like 2 weeks passed, and you're like, oh, I kind of forgot to put some kind of measurement in place to see if it worked.
Right.
And then you realize, wait, I did 3 other tests too, and one of those tests was also on the homepage, and now I can't even trust results going back and looking at it because I didn't have it. So I think I can appreciate that of like, and I think it takes discipline. I don't think quite honestly I'm there yet because I've I've been forcing myself to go quickly, and in my own work I have run into a couple of points where I do it, um, I'm confident in it, and then afterwards I'm like, oh shoot, like I wasn't intentional enough in making sure I had a great idea. I wasn't intentional enough in making sure that at the end I could like sell it appropriately to like make permanent changes, or that like I'm for sure that it was an improvement.
Right. Yeah, and that's really tricky. I mean, another thing I think that makes marketing in particular really challenging is everybody talks about data and how everything should be data driven.
Yeah.
But again, unless you're Amazon or Google, that might not really make sense in all
Yep.
cases because there's a lot of positive outcomes that you can't trace attribution. If somebody listens to this podcast and then calls my company because we're great, call us. I will never know that,
Yep.
and that's okay. I think that it's a little bit. There is a little bit of intuition, but there's also a lot of non-qualitative data that you can look at or make a hypothesis about, and I think it's really important not to discount that. Like, what are your customers saying? Have they told the text great things, or whatever it is that's a non-qualitative thing. I mean, just like not work related but personal branding wise, I've been very active on LinkedIn, and I had a friend say, oh, I love what you're posting. I'm like, okay, that doesn't really show up anywhere, but it's telling me people are seeing it and
Yep.
responding to it. So there's a lot of data points that are not quantitative. And so I think, when you're making your hypothesis, that's part of it. And then, there's other things too, like brand recognition, or I know for a fact when I buy things, I'm more likely to do it after I've seen it several times, because then I
Yep.
start thinking about like, oh, I do need those wool pants. That sounds
Yeah.
great. And so, I don't remember where even the how did you hear about us? The classic small business question doesn't really cover that because I have no idea. I mean, I'll tell you something, but I probably saw it in a few different places.
Yep.
And so I do think that's a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, it's so funny how, and one further complicating factor of that, actually, as my mind goes a couple places at once, is that like when you're on a small team, you just don't have the volume to make, let's say, statistically significant
Yeah.
decisions that can be conclusive. So you have to make choices without, um, you know, data's always got to be interpreted. So let's just, like, even beyond the fact that, let's say you did have statistically significant stuff, like, you still have to interpret it. So for small teams, there's an extra challenge, um, and yeah, like if you're trying to force yourself to find attribution in everything, you're going to start missing the mark on what make people tick. Like, it's an important piece. It helps and it needs to be there, but it's not the only piece. And yeah, I love what you said there. So
Well, particularly too, because a lot of it has to do with where your buyer is in their buying process. So, again, there's cases where I've heard of a service and I'm like, okay, who cares?
yep,
And then all of a sudden you need it, and then they're top of mind, and
yep,
there's no way to predict when that switches. Like the customer can predict it for themselves, let alone you as a company doing it. So,
yep.
yeah, I
Yeah,
think that's
there's a local video company here in Utah called VidArmy, and like, whenever I get to the point that I need video for something, they've won me. We're far away from that. I might not ever need that, but when I know, like, I won't even shop. Like,
right.
I know who I'm gonna go to, and that's just what it is. So that's a long-term payout for them. Who knows when or if it ever comes? But a side payout might be, I might, like, if anybody asks me for video, they'll be the one people I recommend. And that's just like, there's no measurement, like, that's just what it is. So
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. I think it plays more into the psychology of buying than, the data of
yep,
buying. They're
yeah,
related. Of course, they're related. But I do think, when I talk about making a hypothesis, it's really important to keep that in mind, especially at smaller companies. I mean, I told you I'm looking at the website, and so I've been talking to people about what their approaches are to rebuilding websites. I'm more heavy in the operations than definitely than the website building. So I'm
sure.
definitely going to need help. And talking to those people, that's one of the things that is really hard, because they ask me, well, okay, well, what's the data? And I'm like, well, I mean, I've had data tracking for 2 weeks, and we have this many visitors, and it's
Yeah,
like I don't know if this even qualifies as data at this point.
yeah,
So it's definitely, for smaller companies, a little bit tricky to do that always with the quantitative data that everybody is happy to use. I mean, quantitative data is amazing if you have it,
yep,
obviously, but I think you need to use both and not forget about one or the other.
yeah, 100%. And I love that. Um, which I think is easy for us, like, especially operational folks who want to, focused on process, focused on precision and efficiency, right? Um, it's easier to tell a story when you have the quantitative stuff, you feel like, and but that's not everything. There's a healthy balance somewhere. So I think talking to other people, like you've mentioned, getting a structure in place, but maintaining the perspective of, well, I guess just understanding where your business is and what you're doing, and adapting to figure out what you need to do to make it work. So, um, man, thank you. We're at time. Thank you
Okay.
so much. It goes by so fast with these, and I love it. Um, appreciate the time. Uh, check out Kimberly on LinkedIn. Like she said, she's active. I know she is. We've gone back and forth several times, and she's got a lot of good thoughts. So uh, make sure you follow her. Kimberly, thank you again, and we'll see you all next time on the Marketing to Win podcast.